All right, welcome to the final four chapters, the last unit that we're going to look at here in Business Law 1. We're going to jump forward several chapters from 24 to 32. What's in between will be covered in Business Law 2. So maybe I'll see or hear, I guess, for you guys, some of you then. This chapter can also be, these chapters can also be a little off-putting because of the way the language has changed. When you start to study employment law, agency law, independent contractor law, you're going to bump up against pretty rapidly, if you do a little bit of research, the changing nature of the language. Now, when a lot of this law was created, way back, a couple hundred years at least, they tended not to use the term agent and principal, which we prefer to use today, but you would see the term master and servant, which has really kind of fallen out of use. That's really more a function of English and how rapidly English evolves and changes than anything else. So just be aware that if I drop into the terminology, excuse me, master and servant, that it's going to be really the same as agent and principal. Having said that, we'll go ahead and jump into agency formation and duties. Okay, so basically with an agency, you have the first, at the core of it is you have a fiduciary relationship. A fiduciary relationship is a relationship of trust, essentially, where one party is in a position of trust. Actually, both parties are there, but someone is acting for the other party. So we say that person is a fiduciary. It's a fiduciary relationship because they act in their interest. Recently in business, there's been a big dispute about people handling other people's money, mutual funds, things like that. Agents for mutual funds, whether they have a fiduciary relationship, whether they should act in their client's best interest, or whether they can put their own best interest. You know, if they don't come out and say it's a fiduciary relationship, it gives people that manage money and things like mutual funds greater leeway to self-deal, to invest their clients' money in instruments or in mechanisms of savings or growth that might also benefit sometimes more the agent than themselves, than the person they're supposedly representing. But a fiduciary is either a person who acts for another, so they can be sometimes, a fiduciary can be simply a shorthand for agent, or it can be that position of trust. But in any case, this agent, in the old language, the servant, is acting for the benefit of the second party, the principal, old language, master. Okay, we also need to make a distinguishing separation really here between employees, employers, and employers, independent contractors. And with the rise of the gig economy in the 21st century, this is becoming an increasingly important distinction. Now, the kind of older model, the early industrial model, was employer-employee relationship. And under this model, any employee who dealt with the general public was deemed to be an agent of their employer. And there was a whole body of law that applied here. Employment law, kind of a specialized form of law, never, I would say, as robustly developed as, say, property law or contract law, but well developed. Conversely, there is now independent contractors, and I mentioned the gig economy. And this is something, you know, that's really reshaped the business world in many ways. Independent contractors are not employees and are not the agents of the people that work for them, generally. Now, they may be considered an agent, but they're not in the same way that an employee is. This gives certain benefits to both parties. Now, it can give flexibility to the employer. It can give flexibility to the employee. It also has some downsides, but independent contractors, or ICs, may or may not be agents. Typically, it's more difficult to establish agency for independent contractors. So what is an independent contractor, I hear you saying? Well, an independent contractors generally are solely liable for what they do. And there's all sorts of federal and state law that applies to employees but not independent contractors. Let me take you to a really important example. And that's going to be Social Security and Social Security withholding. So if you have an employee, you must withhold the employee's Social Security wages, plus you have to match that. So I think it's 6.2. If an employee was earning $100,000, you would have to withhold about $6,000 a year. You'd have to match that with another $6,000 a year. You'd have to pay the federal government $12,000. If you've got an independent contractor, that burden of self-employment, there's a self-employment tax, falls on the independent contractor. So you can see right there that there's a benefit for the person hiring the independent contractor to hire an independent contractor, not an employee, because it reduces their tax liability. So some states, and in particular even some agencies inside the federal government, have their own factors. The only things to consider are you an employee or are you an independent contractor? Because you can see how some unscrupulous people might like to essentially create someone who is an employee in everything but name, classify them as an independent contractor, and escape these liabilities. So most independent contractor determinations focus on the degree of control that the business owner exercises over the person doing the job. And as I said, if you can show that this person's truly independent, then you can avoid tax liability here. So the IRS is concerned about that because they know that employers are better at withholding than employees are better at paying taxes later. So what factors might make a party an independent contractor? Boy, there's some spelling errors in that slide. I apologize. Well, the first thing we look at is how much control does the principal exercise over the work of the agent? Do they simply hire someone and say, produce this for me, get back to me when you can? Or do they say, here's exact specifications, exact timelines, exactly what I want? The more control you're exercising, the more likely you're not an independent contractor, but an employee. We also look at what is your line of work. You know, if I'm a pharmaceutics manufacturer and I hire someone to be a security guard as an independent contractor, those are two different things. But if I'm a pharmaceutical manufacturer and I hire a scientist to develop a drug, those are more closely related, so it's more likely that that person is an employee rather than an IC. Is the work in this field done with or without supervision? Does the principal supply tools, which would, if I give you everything to do your job, you're more likely an employee. How long does it last? The longer it lasts, the more likely you're an employee. How do I pay you? Method of payment. Is it by the job? Independent contractor. Is it by the hour? Employee. What's your degree of skill? The higher the level of skill, the more likely you're an IC, like a lawyer or a doctor. Now again, there can be lawyers and doctors that are employees. So these are just some factors that we consider, or the IRS considers. Okay, ownership of the work product. If an employee creates the work, it becomes the property of the employer. So let's suppose I hire a programmer and he automates my accounts payable system. The program he produces, the code, belongs to him. Belongs to me. I am the boss. On the other hand, if I go out and I hire someone and I say, okay, you're not my employee, but I'm going to pay you $1,000 to develop a accounting system for me. Well, that independent contractor retains control of that code and that program. Now, he may license it or it may be under my use, but he controls it. And this is something that, you know, employers here often want it both ways. They want to hire someone and say, well, you're an IC, but what you produce is mine. And that's generally not true. If you hire an independent contractor, what he produces independently belongs to him, particularly in the point of replication. So we get into a significant issue here in regards to the producing of intellectual property. Agency formations. Agencies are consensual relationships. We generally do not impose agencies. Having said that, if a principal is going to hire an independent contractor or is going to create an agency, whether it's an employee or an independent contractor, that principal has to have contractual capacity. If you had someone who was incompetent, mentally incompetent, then they couldn't form a new agencies. Now, agencies can be created for any legal purpose. Now, there's some things that we'll exclude agency for, but if it's legal, we let you do it. It's kind of self-explanatory. Typically, we create it in one of four ways. Now, the first way here is by far 99.99999 the most common way, and that's by an agreement. The principal and the agent come to agreement. We also have ratification, estoppel, and operation of law. So agency by agreement, it can be an oral agency. I can say, here, I'm going to hire you. I just have a friend that went and got a part at a junkyard for me. So we didn't have a written contract, but he went and got the part, and I said I'd pay him. This was an oral agency. Now, I could have created an express agency. I could have drafted a contract and said, okay, go do this, and when you do that, I will pay you, and you'll sign and I sign. So agencies can be express contracts, usually, or they can be oral, or they can be implied, a little bit rare. Sometimes you have someone who acts for another party. So let's suppose I sent my friend to this junkyard as my agent to get a rear differential for a car that my daughter bought. And he gets it, and while he's there, he says, hey, you know, I know Jay needs a steering wheel for the van. So I'm going to buy that steering wheel as well for him. So he buys the differential, and then he also buys the steering wheel. Well, he could come to me and say, hey, I bought the steering wheel. I could say, oh, that's great. Let me pay you for it. That would be ratification. I'm accepting the deal that he created, the purchase that he was involved in. I can also have agency by estoppel, where I act like there's an agency to a third party. So if I called up someone and I said, hey, my friend's coming to the junkyard, I've got a credit account there, whatever he finds, whatever piece he's looking for, you know, go ahead and put him on my bill. Now that can prevent me later from saying, well, he wasn't my agent. Well, you acted like there was an agent. I gave him the authority to do it every week, and then one week he shows up, he does something, it's not what I wanted him to do, but he did it. I could be stopped from denying he didn't have the authority. Finally, there can be agency by operation of law. This is where the law intervenes. Again, these are rare agencies. Most agencies truly are voluntary and created either express or by oral agreement. So sometimes the law will impose certain agencies. For example, if my wife went out and she bought food and a bill came to my house, and I said, well, I didn't tell her to go buy food, I would be bound nonetheless. They can also arise more rarely in emergency situations, for example, things like emergency medical care. Okay, what duties, does the agent owe to the principal? Well, the first thing the agent should do is he should do his job, performance. Use reasonable skill, reasonable diligence. Now, this can be, again, there's a spelling error there. I must have been having a bad day. This can vary according to the agent's expertise. If you hire a doctor, you can't expect him to be a lawyer. If you hire a lawyer, you can't expect him to be an accountant. Notification. The agent should keep the principal informed of what's going on. So my friend that goes to the junkyard should keep me aware of what he's doing, what he's buying. He tells me all the important information. Hey, I got that differential for you, or hey, I got you the steering wheel. Loyalty. Now, generally, the agent must act solely for the principal. So let's suppose that he goes to this junkyard. He is going into the junkyard to buy a rear differential for this van. And while he's in there, he sees something else. Well, if he was my agent, let's just suppose he was my exclusive agent at this point, and he was in that junkyard because I sent him there. Maybe I flew him to the junkyard in Kansas or something, and he buys it. Well, whatever he sees, even if he could buy it and profit from it, he should put my interest as the principal first. That's loyalty. Obedience. He should follow my lawful and clear instructions. Now, if it's an emergency, you have a little bit more leeway, but he should do what I tell him to do. Accounting. The agent should keep records of the money and the goods that he gave and received and should not commingle funds. Now, this is because attorneys are very frequently agents. This is the #1 reason that attorneys in North Carolina are disbarred. Not because we steal money, not because we cheat or lie, but because we commingle our clients' money with our own. So if I'm a real estate attorney and I'm closing a house, I might have hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been cut by the lender to pay off old loans and purchase a house. And I'm going to do the closing in my office, let's say. Well, there's a temptation, just take that money and deposit in an account and let that money earn interest for me, the attorney, as opposed to putting it in a non-interest-bearing trust account where it just sits there, which, by the way, lets the bank earn money on it, just sits there. So some attorneys, unlawfully and getting themselves disbarred, will sometimes commingle funds like that. And they can do that with large cash settlements as well. What does the principal, what does he have? What are his or her duties to the agent? Well, they should pay the agent. So my friend who went and got me that rear differential, I gave him a little extra money, more than what he paid for it. Now, he did it as a favor to me, but I gave him compensation, and it should be paid timely and reasonable. If there's no set amount, it should be what's customary. Maybe there's a finding fee. The principal should also reimburse the agent for their costs. If my friend had to ship that part someplace, or if he had some additional costs, I should pay for it. Also, any injury or anything he suffered during it, I should cooperate with him. And depending upon where he is, I should provide safe working conditions for him. All right, for every duty, there is a right or remedy. So you have, of course, all the normal contractual remedies and tort remedies. One of the things an agent can do if the principal is breaching the contract is not act for him in the future. He can demand accountings. Now, if you think about this in the terms of, say, a home seller and an agent, let's suppose an agent has been closing a lot of houses and he thinks he's not getting paid the correct amount of money for each sale by his principal, the realtor that owns the agency. Well, he can demand an accounting. Sometimes they can demand specific performance if the contract calls for it. But again, courts are hesitant to do that. What about the principal? What about the person who hires this agent? Well, he has all sorts of rights as well and remedies. Obviously, he can fire the agent, but he also can sue for slander, trespass, tort, misrepresentation, libel, fraud, contract remedies. All those are available. The main actions they have, first of all, is they can argue about the existence of a constructive trust, that the agent had any benefit the agent had from any transaction while he was an agent of the principal, that he holds those benefits in trust for the principal. So if I hire an agent to fly to Kansas to go through a junkyard and he earns frequent flyer miles, those belong to me as the principal, not him. Avoidance. If the agent breaks a contract, the principal can end the agency, that is, avoid the contract. And indemnification. If the principal is sued by a third party for some agent's mess up, then the principal can get the agent to come in and defend him. All right, well, that was a relatively short chapter, but we've got 4 to cover this unit, so enjoy, and when you're ready, go to the next.